They laughed when he walked in. Not loud, not cruel, but enough to make sure he heard it. His uniform was old, frayed at the cuffs, the colors faded by sun, time, and memory. It didn't shine like the ones in recruitment ads. It didn't look fresh, but he wore it the same way he once stood at attention. Straight, quiet, and without apology. The kids at the back booth thought it was funny. One of them even joked loud enough for others to hear, "Is he late for Halloween?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and a general stepped in, scanned the room, spotted the old man, and without hesitation, saluted. And in that second, the laughter died. This is not just a story. This is a reminder that uniforms may fade, but honor never does. Welcome to Endless Stories, where silence speaks louder than insults, and those who served never truly stand alone. If you believe in respect, in legacy, in quiet strength, stay with us. Subscribe, and help us carry these stories forward. One salute at a time. He hadn't worn it in years. Not on parades, not for speeches, not for Veterans Day discounts or town hall ceremonies. The uniform stayed zipped inside a garment bag in the back of the closet, pressed flat between forgotten jackets and a folded flag that never saw sunlight. But that morning, something in him shifted. Not from pride, not nostalgia, just a quiet call. The kind only a soldier hears, long after the wars are done and the bugles have stopped. He took the bag down slowly, unzipped it halfway, ran his fingers over the shoulder patch. It didn't shine. The fabric was older now, stiff in some places, soft in others, the seams tired but still holding. Just like him. He dressed in silence, careful with every button. The jacket no longer hugged his frame like it used to. His shoulders had thinned, and his hands weren't as steady, but he tucked in the shirt, pulled up the trousers, tied his boots the same way he had 1,000 times in the dark. No mirror pep talk, no dramatic pause, just a glance at his reflection and a single nod. Nod of approval, of readiness. The diner was 3 blocks away. He used to walk there after morning drills back in '78, when his boots were blacker and his knees didn't protest every step. It hadn't changed much. Same chipped paint on the trim. Same bell above the door that jingled like an afterthought. He stepped inside, the scent of grease and burnt coffee washing over him like memory. Heads didn't turn. No one stood up. The teenager at the counter barely looked up from her phone, gum clicking between sentences as she motioned with her chin toward the booth by the window. He made his way there slowly, deliberately, not dragging his feet, not making a show of it, just walking like he'd always walked into rooms that didn't know what he'd carried in with him. A group of young men sat 2 booths over, college age, all baseball caps and laughter, legs draped across seats like the world owed them space. One of them glanced over, smirked, nudged the other. "Hey, check out Captain Time Machine," he whispered, not quiet enough. His buddy chuckled, followed by another, then a muttered, "Guess somebody's headed to a costume party." The old man didn't flinch, didn't change pace, didn't even let his eyes flicker toward them. He just reached his booth, eased into the seat with the care of someone used to doing things without help, and placed his hat gently on the table like it still meant something, because it did. When the waitress came, she was young too, maybe 21, but she noticed the patch. She noticed the way he sat, upright, even in rest, and how he folded his hands like he had nowhere else to be, but still understood time. "Coffee, sir?" she asked. "Black. 2 sugars," he replied, voice soft but even, not rehearsed, just practiced. The table of boys kept giggling. It wasn't cruel, just careless. That particular kind of young arrogance, not rooted in hate, but in not knowing better, and not bothering to learn. He didn't acknowledge them, didn't shift in his seat. He stirred his coffee when it came, 1 sugar packet at a time, slow and smooth, as if he were back at a forward operating base, making instant coffee before the next patrol. Outside, no one noticed the black SUV that rolled into the far side of the lot. It didn't flash its lights, didn't honk. It just parked, engine quiet, windows tinted, body spotless. Then the second one came, then a third. Inside the diner, nothing had changed. The boys kept laughing. The waitress checked her watch. The manager scolded the busboy for dropping a fork. No one had time for reverence until the bell rang. Not the bell of mockery, the bell above the door. It was soft, just like earlier, but somehow now the whole room turned. Not because they recognized the sound, but because of the man it followed. He stepped through the door like a shadow stepping into light, tall, broad, posture carved from decades of command. He didn't wear stars on his collar, but you could see them in the way the air shifted around him. Not a word spoken, no ceremony, no announcement. He saw the old man instantly, walked straight toward the booth, each step silent but grounded like boots on a parade ground. The young men's jokes fell flat in their throats. The cook peeked out from the kitchen. The waitress stood still with a notepad halfway lifted. No one moved. No one dared. The general stood beside the old man's table. Didn't speak. Didn't make a show. He simply came to attention, held his frame, and saluted crisp, sharp, final. Not out of pity. Not for show. Out of memory. Out of recognition. The old man looked up. Not surprised. Not overwhelmed. Just present. He didn't return the salute. Didn't need to. A single nod, slow, meaningful, passed between them. Then the general turned, walked out, and disappeared as silently as he came. The boys at the booth sat stone still, their faces pale, their jokes crushed beneath the weight of a gesture they didn't expect and couldn't explain. The waitress came back, refilled the old man's cup without saying a word, and this time, when she set it down, her hands were steady, like she understood. And the old man sipped his coffee the same way he always had, as if the world hadn't changed. But the room had, and everyone in it knew why. He didn't rush the sip. He never did. Not when he was younger, not when time was measured in seconds between radio silence and thunder, not even now when the world moved faster than it listened. The cup rested in his hand like it belonged there, steady, warm, untouched by the chill that had crept into the air after the general left. Around him, the diner didn't speak. Not really. The forks moved. The kitchen sizzled. The door opened once or twice. But the voices, the jokes, the casual noise that once bounced off the walls with reckless comfort, had all gone silent. The only sound that mattered was the soft scrape of ceramic on formica and the faint creak of the vinyl seat as he leaned forward, shoulders still squared like he hadn't been dismissed. The young men at the nearby table kept their heads down. One of them, the one who joked loudest, hadn't touched his food. He stirred his soda like it might answer a question he hadn't yet formed. The others mumbled. Not to him, not to anyone. Just enough to fill the air with the sound of shame trying to disguise itself as reflection. They had seen something none of them could unsee. A salute that wasn't for them but left them smaller anyway. The waitress returned, slower this time. She held the coffee pot with both hands, even though it was light, even though she'd done this 100 times. She didn't ask if he wanted a refill. She simply reached out and gently topped off the mug without letting it spill or cool. Still hot, she said, voice softer now, without the practiced cheer she'd used before. The old man glanced up at her, offered a half smile, the kind that doesn't lift lips so much as eyes, and nodded once. That was all. At the counter, the manager had come out from the back. Not to check receipts, not to enforce dress codes, just to watch. He stood there with a dish towel folded in his hands like a napkin at a wake, gaze fixed on the booth, not in regret, but in awareness. Like someone just realizing a painting they'd walked past for years was actually a window. A mother with 2 young kids entered the diner just as the bell rang again. Ordinary this time, cheerful even. She smiled at the waitress, motioned to the booth in the back. The little girl pointed at the man's uniform as they passed, tugged on her mom's sleeve. Was he in the army? She whispered. Her voice was innocent, curious. The kind of question that carries no filter, only wonder. The mother smiled, knelt to her daughter's height, and answered quietly, "Yes, sweetheart. A long time ago, and probably still is, just on the inside now." The old man didn't react, but something in his jaw loosened, like tension slowly exhaled. Across the room, the man who had once laughed got up, Tray in hand, movement stiff. He walked slowly to the trash bin, dumped his untouched food, and stood there too long, unsure whether to leave or linger. His friends were already gone. Not physically, but in spirit. They no longer joked. They no longer sprawled. They sat like boys who had seen their reflection in a different kind of mirror and didn't like what stared back. The man took a step toward the old soldier's booth. Then another. Then stopped. Not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't sure if he was welcome. The old man looked up, as if sensing the pause behind him, and locked eyes with him. Not harsh, not judgmental, but clear, present. The younger man opened his mouth, closed it again, then gave the smallest nod, awkward but real. The kind of gesture that says, I don't have the words, but I know I need them. The old man returned it. That was enough. No lecture, no scolding, just a brief understanding exchanged across time and mistakes. The man left, the bell chimed, and the coffee stayed warm, because sometimes it isn't about the heat in the cup. It's about what's held still inside it. He drank slowly, not because he had nowhere to be, but because he had been somewhere most people couldn't imagine. And for the first time in a long while, someone remembered, not through words, but through silence. The kind that says, we see you now, not too late, but just in time. The booth by the window had always been just another table. Number 6 on the chart, second from the left. The one people asked for when they wanted sunlight on their coffee or to avoid the cold draft from the front door. It had seen hundreds of breakfasts, spilled syrups, awkward first dates, and tired Monday mornings. But after that morning, after the salute, after the silence that followed and the glances that no longer dared linger too long, it changed. No one told it to. No memo was posted. No sign was hung. But the booth was different now. And everyone felt it. Started small. The next customer to enter glanced toward it, started to speak. Is that one open? But stopped when she noticed it was already clean, spotless, untouched. The waitress gave a soft shake of the head. Not a firm no, not official, just a gesture that said, not today. And they understood. The table sat empty through the rest of the morning. The lunch crowd came and went, busy, loud, alive with clinking glasses and full plates. But even in the rush, when every table filled and waitlist stretched longer than the cook's patience, no one was seated there. Even the hostess didn't suggest it. Even the manager, who usually chased turnover like it was gold, avoided calling out that booth. He simply said, let it breathe, and walked back to his office. Later that afternoon, the busboy, barely 17, always too loud, always on his phone, paused as he wiped nearby tables. He stood by that booth for a second longer than usual, then reached into his apron and pulled out a small folded napkin. On it, written in neat black ink, were 5 words. Thank you. We remember you. He tucked it under the salt shaker, adjusted it once, then walked away without a word. The waitress who had served the old man returned around the same time. She didn't expect to see him still there, but part of her hoped. When she walked past and saw only the clean cup, now empty, and the 2 sugar packets still neatly folded on the saucer, her chest tightened slightly. Not out of regret, but something deeper, a kind of knowing. She cleared the table slowly, wiped the surface as if polishing a memory, then placed the napkin gently back where it had been. Not for the next guest, but because there wouldn't be one. Not there. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, word had already started to spread. Not through headlines or hashtags, just conversation. Whispers in the bakery across the street. A retelling by a high school teacher who'd stopped in for takeout and witnessed the moment unfold. A phone call from a daughter to her mother. Mom, you won't believe what happened at the diner today. No exaggeration. No need. The image spoke for itself. A man in an old uniform, worn not for attention, but for memory. A general walking in without guards, without press, without noise. A salute exchanged that carried the weight of decades and silence. And a table that, for reasons no one had to explain, had become sacred. By the time evening came, something even more unexpected happened. A man entered the diner. mid-30s, civilian clothes, tired face, but his eyes locked onto that booth the moment he walked in. He didn't ask to sit, didn't order food. He just approached quietly, placed a folded photo next to the napkin. An image of a soldier in the desert, sun behind him, face shadowed, name unreadable, and then left. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The staff watched him go. No one stopped him. And after he left, the manager finally walked over. He looked at the table, not as property, not as a number on a seating chart, but as a piece of something larger. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small card holder, the kind used for reserved signs at weddings or banquets, and slid a note inside. It read only, "This seat is taken." No one questioned it. No one challenged it. And from that night forward, Booth 6 wasn't just a place to sit. It became a place to pause, a place to remember, a quiet corner of the world where jokes stopped, and eyes softened, and even the loudest voices learned to speak a little less. Because respect, once reclaimed, doesn't need to be demanded. It only needs to be recognized. The morning shift used to be noise. Forks scraping plates, coffee sloshing in pots, jokes thrown over shoulders like aprons. The younger servers talked too fast, the music played too loud, and no one ever paused long enough to hear what silence might be saying. But ever since that day, the day the uniform returned and a general followed it in, something had shifted in the air. Not tension, not fear, just attentiveness, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the moment and now refused to forget it. The waitress who'd served the old man had taken 2 days off after that morning. Not because she was overwhelmed, not even because she needed rest, but because something in her had changed. She spent the first day sitting at home, scrolling through old photos her father had left behind. He'd served too, quietly, never talked about it much, but now she wished she'd asked. The second day, she returned to the diner, not to work, just to sit. She took her coffee to go, but she didn't go. She just sat near the window, 2 booths over from the one that stayed empty, and watched how people looked at the booth now, how they spoke in lower tones around it, how even the rowdiest customers slowed their steps when walking past it. The napkin was still there. So was the photo, and the little card that read, "This seat is taken." None of it official, all of it understood. By the time her next shift started, she no longer served with performance. She didn't force smiles. She didn't laugh on cue. She greeted people with the same warmth. But now her tone was steady, measured. She noticed things she used to miss. The way older guests hesitated before speaking. The way a young man in a hoodie flinched slightly when she asked if he'd like his coffee hot or iced. She listened more, spoke less, let the pauses breathe. And she wasn't the only one. The cook, who used to yell orders over the counter like a drill sergeant in a sitcom, now called them out clearly but calmly. He burned fewer omelets. He added a little more butter to the toast. The new hostess, barely out of high school, used to chew gum behind the counter and text with her free hand. Now she made eye contact, greeted each person as they walked in, especially if they wore boots older than she was. The young man who had laughed the loudest that day never returned. But one of his friends did. Alone. He came in during the lunch rush, sat near the back, ordered just a soda and didn't say much. But before he left, he stopped by the register and left something on the counter. A small ribbon, folded into a triangle, not attached to a story, just there, as if to say, "I heard you now. I didn't before." And that's how the shift changed. Not from policies, not from training videos, but from a moment that didn't need to shout to be remembered. From a gesture that rewrote the way people moved inside those walls. One afternoon, a boy came in with his grandfather. The old man wore a hat embroidered with his unit's name and a patch that barely clung to his jacket. They sat near the booth. Not in it, but close enough. The waitress walked over, recognized the insignia on the man's sleeve, and instead of handing him a menu, simply said, "Would you like your usual, sir?" He smiled, didn't ask how she knew, just nodded. And when the coffee came, it was already sweetened the way he liked. The boy looked up at her after she left and whispered, "Do they know who he is?" The old man answered before she could. They don't need to. They just know how to treat someone like him. And that was the shift. A place that once ran on sound now moved with intention. A room that once fed people now fed remembrance. And all it took was one old man in a worn uniform, and one younger man who still knew how to salute. He walked in without a sound, no door slam, no heavy boots to announce his presence, just the soft chime of the bell above the entrance. Not loud, not urgent, more like the room acknowledging that someone worth noticing had arrived. He wasn't tall, didn't wear medals, didn't carry anything that told a story to the untrained eye, but for those who paid attention, the patch on his cap, the posture in his shoulders, and the calm in his silence said more than a speech ever could. He made his way to the back without a glance around, choosing not the famous booth under the reserved sign, but the one beside it, close enough to feel memory, far enough to leave space. He sat slowly, hands folded flat on the table, his eyes tracking nothing and everything outside the window where the sun cut the flag just right so it shimmered without moving too much. The waitress didn't hesitate. She recognized the kind of quiet he carried. Not empty, not heavy, just full of things not spoken. She approached with the pot already half-tilted. "Coffee?" she asked, and he nodded once. No smile, no words, just that slight gesture of acknowledgement from someone who's learned to ration even small movements. She poured carefully, steam rising between them like an invisible line that said, "Thank you for not asking more." She placed the cup down, didn't ask about cream or sugar. Some men have already made peace with bitterness. He didn't drink, just stared. Not at the coffee, not at the room, at something only he could see, maybe a field, maybe a hallway, maybe a single face frozen in a moment no one else would ever understand. The diner moved around him, slower now, as if gravity had subtly shifted toward that corner. No one interrupted, not out of fear, out of something older. Then a boy walked in, maybe 10, full of bounce, full of noise until he saw the man in the cap. He stopped mid-step, eyes wide, breath caught. Something in him recognized something in that man, even if he couldn't name it. His mother tugged his sleeve, whispering something playful, but the boy had already stepped forward, crossing the room in small, deliberate steps like a child who knew he was entering sacred ground. He stopped just beside the man's table, stood straight, and raised his hand in a crooked, honest salute, the kind only kids can give with full heart and no technique. The veteran looked at him, eyes unmoving, then raised his own hand slowly and returned it, sharp, precise, and impossibly quiet, like a ripple without water. The boy dropped his arm, smiled, and turned to go. His mother stood speechless, one hand over her mouth, the other resting against her chest like she'd forgotten how to breathe. The man took his first sip then, slow, small, as if the moment had sweetened the coffee more than sugar ever could. When he finished, he stood, reached into his pocket, and left no bills, no change. Just a coin, heavy, worn. Not a tip, a challenge coin, laid flat at the table's edge. The waitress walked over after he left. She didn't pick it up. She just looked at it and understood. It wasn't meant to be taken. It was meant to stay. A reminder, a marker, a whisper that said, "I was here, I was seen, I left something behind, not to be remembered, but to remember you back." No one moved it. Not the waitress who'd seen it left behind. Not the manager who wiped down every table every night. Not even the busboy who didn't know what it meant but instinctively knew better than to touch it. The coin sat where he placed it. Flat, still, centered just enough to catch the light but not enough to show off. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. Anyone who knew, knew. And those who didn't learned quick. At first, some thought it was just something forgotten. A token, a piece of someone's story left behind like a bookmark. But the staff treated it like it was still warm, like it had breath, like it belonged to something bigger than the table it rested on. That night, after the last customer left and the kitchen lights dimmed, the waitress passed by the booth where it sat. She didn't stop, didn't clean, just nodded. The next morning, it was still there, untouched even though a new shift had come through, and not one person had dared disturb it. Customers asked about it. Some pointed, others whispered. One older man, gray around the temples, leaned in close and whispered to his wife, "That's not just any coin." She didn't ask what he meant. She just took his hand and squeezed it. By noon, it had become part of the booth. Not an object on a surface, a presence in the room. Some people sat near it, close enough to glance but not too close to disrespect. A woman with a camera once tried to take a picture. The waitress asked her, kindly but firmly, not to. "It's not for Instagram," she said, and somehow that was enough. By midweek, someone left a note beside it. Not folded, not dramatic, just a strip of receipt paper with a single line scrawled in pen. "For the one who stayed silent, but spoke loudest." Another day, a man in a pressed shirt sat nearby, stared at the coin for 10 minutes without ordering. When the waitress asked if he was waiting for someone, he said, "Already met him. 20 years ago. Different place. Same look." He left a $20 bill without touching a glass. The coin didn't shift. Even during the rush, when every seat filled and people argued about booths and chairs and who was there first, that table remained untouched. Not because of policy, not because of rules, but because it had become sacred. A small, square altar to everything the world forgets until it's forced to remember. One night, long after closing, the cook, the same one who used to roll his eyes at anything sentimental, walked out from the kitchen, hands still covered in flour, and sat down across from the coin. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak. Just sat there, elbows on the table, eyes locked on something far beyond the laminate surface. Like the coin was a portal not to a place, but to a moment. The next morning, when the waitress arrived early to prep the coffee, she found something new beside the coin. Not another coin, not a flag, just a folded piece of notebook paper. Inside, in block letters, "I never said thank you, but I saw you. Every day. I remember." She didn't throw it away. She placed it gently under the coin, the edges peeking out like a shadow that wanted to stay close. And from that point on, no one asked who wrote it, because they already knew. The coin had done what no speech, no policy, no plaque could ever do. It made people remember, without saying a word. He hadn't planned to return. Kids rarely do. Moments pass, memories fade, and the world pulls them toward brighter, louder things. But something about that morning had stayed with him. Not just the salute, not just the weight of silence in that booth, but the way the man had looked at him, not like a child, but like someone who mattered. It had followed him home, into his drawings, into the way he stood up straighter at school, into the stories he asked his grandfather to tell again. Not about war, not about battles, just about people, about the quiet ones, the ones who came back and didn't speak much anymore. Weeks passed. And then, one Saturday morning, he tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked to go back to the diner. She didn't question it. She saw it in his eyes, not curiosity, respect. When they arrived, he didn't bounce in, didn't run for pancakes. He walked straight to the back, not to the booth, but to the one beside it, just like before. And when he saw the coin was still there, his whole face changed. Not into a smile, not into awe, but something softer. Something older than he was supposed to be. He didn't touch it, didn't even lean too close. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper, folded small, edges worn, and placed it beside the coin. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even legible to anyone else. Just a drawing. A boy, a man, two hands in salute. The waitress saw it as she poured his orange juice and said nothing. She simply adjusted the napkin holder so it wouldn't blow away. The boy looked up at her and asked, "Did he ever come back?" She thought about the man in the cap, the one who left the coin and said nothing. She shook her head. "No," she said. "But he didn't have to." The boy nodded like he understood something deep. Not everything, but enough. He ate in silence that day. No screens, no fuss, just pancakes and orange juice and glances toward a table he wouldn't sit at. When they left, his mother placed a 5 beside his drawing. The waitress left it there all day. No one moved it. By closing, the paper had curled at the edges, and the drawing had faded just a bit, but the message remained. Something had passed from one generation to the next, not through speeches or history books, but through a single moment held still on paper and table and memory. And from then on, they didn't just say someone had returned. They said someone had continued. He came in like shadows do, quietly, without needing space, without asking for it. No one noticed him at first, which was exactly how he wanted it. He sat near the far wall, back to the corner, the kind of seat where you can see every exit without being seen. He didn't take off his jacket, didn't order right away, just watched. The room wasn't busy that morning, but it carried a hum, soft chatter, clinks of glass, the low voice of a radio that never quite found the right station. And there, beneath all that, sat the coin, still in its place, untouched, framed now by a folded napkin and a child's faded drawing that hadn't been moved in days, maybe weeks. He looked at it like a man seeing a ghost, not startled but held. And though his eyes never filled, something in his hands clenched just slightly. Not in anger, in memory. The waitress walked by, not the same one from before, a new girl. But even she slowed as she passed his table, as if his stillness had a gravity to it. "You okay, sir?" she asked, cautious but kind. He nodded, and his voice came low, gravel-thick. "Coffee, black." She brought it within a minute, set it down without comment. He didn't drink, just stared into it like it might show him a face he once knew. The cook stepped out from the kitchen, drying his hands, looked over, froze. He recognized him, not by name, not from a photo, but by posture. That same posture he'd seen the day the salute happened. This man carried the same weight, the same silence. And then it clicked. The coin. The man who left it. This was him. Not younger, not older, just returned. The waitress saw the cook staring and leaned in. "You know him?" she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded slowly and backed into the kitchen like the presence had pulled too many thoughts to the surface at once. The man finally moved, reached into his coat, pulled out a worn envelope, creased, softened at the corners, and slid it to the edge of the table, then slowly stood. He didn't go to the coin, didn't touch the table. He just placed the envelope on the seat of the empty booth. No one stopped him, no one spoke, and then he walked out. The waitress waited a long time before approaching. She picked up the envelope like it might break. Inside, a photo. Old. 2 soldiers. One arm around the other's shoulders. A field in the background. No names. No note. Just a single phrase scribbled on the back in faded ink. He never needed words. Neither do I. It wasn't silence in the usual sense. Not the absence of sound. Not the stillness of an empty room. It was something else. Denser. Fuller. Like the quiet that settles in a chapel after someone lights a candle. People still spoke, but softer. Plates still clinked, but slower. The staff still moved, but more intentionally. Like they didn't want to disturb something sacred that now lingered in the air. The envelope still rested on the booth seat. The cook hadn't touched it. The waitress didn't move it. Even the manager, usually quick to clear anything unattended, simply stood at a distance and watched. Something about the photo inside, the handwritten words on the back, had changed the temperature of the room. Not colder, not warmer, just deeper. That morning, 2 veterans came in together. One with a limp, the other with steady hands that never left his pockets. They noticed the envelope before they sat. One gave a nod. The other placed his cap gently on his table before whispering something the waitress didn't catch. She brought them coffee without asking how they wanted it. She already knew. Later that day, a father came in with his teenage son. They sat near the corner. The boy was glued to his phone, thumbs dancing, ears covered by earbuds. But at some point, his eyes lifted, drawn by something unseen. Maybe the light reflecting off the coin, or maybe the stillness of the booth itself. He pulled out one earbud, then the other. "Dad," he said quietly. "Who sits there?" The father paused, looked over, didn't answer right away. He'd been there before. He'd seen the man. He'd seen the salute. And now the photo, the drawing, the coin. He took a breath. "Someone who earned it," he finally replied. The boy didn't speak again for the rest of their meal. That evening, Just before closing, the waitress walked past the booth one more time. She didn't stop. She didn't clean. But she reached out and gently recentered the coin. Not because it had moved, but because it felt right. Like tending a grave you never buried but carry with you. The envelope was still there. No one claimed it. No one needed to. Some stories aren't read aloud. They're felt. And the quiet that followed? It wasn't the end of anything. It was the space where remembrance could breathe. It had been weeks, maybe longer. No one kept count. The booth by the window had remained untouched all that time. Like a page never turned. Like a seat left open for someone who might never return but was never forgotten. And yet that morning, something felt different. The air was the same, the light hit the coin just right. The napkin and the drawing hadn't moved. But there was a quiet tension in the way the chairs were stacked, the way the floor was swept. As if the room itself was waiting for something to break the rhythm without breaking the reverence. He arrived just after the first coffee pot finished brewing. Not old, not young, middle-aged, plain clothes, soft walk. But he had the eyes, the kind that looked past people into time. He paused at the door, scanned the room, and saw it instantly. The booth, the coin, the envelope, the silence around it. He didn't ask permission, didn't nod, didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the booth, gently lifted the envelope from the seat, looked at it for just a second, then slid into the booth like it had been waiting for him all along. No one moved. Not the cook, not the waitress, not the man sipping coffee at the corner who'd witnessed that very first salute. They just watched. He placed the envelope on the table, took a breath, and reached into his coat pocket. A second coin. He set it beside the first. No words, no performance. Just two coins now, resting side by side, like two names carved into the same piece of stone. The waitress approached slowly. "Can I get you something?" He looked up. "Ice steady. Just a black coffee," he said. And a moment. She brought the cup, set it down without a sound, backed away, not in fear, but respect. He stared out the window, past the flagpole, past the quiet street, as if seeing something others couldn't. He stayed for 20 minutes, then stood, straightened the edge of the table with his palm. And before leaving, he whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the space beside him. That seat was never empty, just waiting. And then he walked out, leaving behind two coins, one drawing, one letter, and a booth that no longer belonged to memory alone but to legacy. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Maybe you didn't know the man in the booth. Maybe you've never worn a uniform. But if your heart paused when that general saluted, if your breath caught when the boy raised his hand, if you felt something deeper than words in the silence that followed, then you understood exactly what this story was about. Not medals, not rank, but quiet dignity, invisible scars, and the power of being seen when the world forgets to look. At Endless Stories, we don't just tell tales, we honor echoes. And if this one stayed with you, don't let it stay silent. Share it. Comment with a name you remember. Subscribe to help us keep these stories alive, because somewhere out there, another booth is waiting.